Listen, I love a sleazy cop show or movie. You know, I currently am almost at the end of rewatching Hill Street Blues, which is awful. It's a little bit of humor, a lot of sleazy cop, a lot of prejudice and bigotry. I'm watching it because I want to see what policing was like back in the 80s. Even though it's fictionalized, I believe a lot of the things having to do with how the police are prejudiced towards the people in the community is true. It's true. But I also like to have something on in the background while I'm working. And I'm also watching ER and I'm also watching all these other shows, but these sleazy cop shows, that are set in like Detroit or Miami or New York City, and everywhere they go, there's steam rising up from the sewers and their guns have endless bullets and somebody's always dying. It's fun. It's entertaining when it's fiction. When it's fiction, it's fine. But when it's real life, when you have to combat that in real life, when you have to face that in real life, when you have to deal with sleazy cops in real life, it's anything but entertaining. I've got some explaining to do. Let's get into it. Hey there, Allians, out there in the know-it-all nation of Ayana Explains It All. Welcome back for another episode of the podcast hosted by the Black Muslim lady lawyer with an opinion on everything, born and raised in the hood, living in the suburbs of Northeast Ohio, avoiding, once again, Mandalorian spoilers because I have not caught up yet, and Fox News clips. Ayana Explains It All is the podcast that is available on 13 media streaming platforms, including Spotify for podcasters, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and YouTube, to name a few. I'm also on Good Pods, Google Podcasts, Castbox, Audio Mac, and a host of others. You can link to Ayana Explains It All at ayanaexplainsitall.com. That's www.ayana, explainsitall.com. Yes, the podcast has its own website, and soon, inshallah, we will be trademarked. Yes, I applied for a trademark a year ago. I did not know that it takes over a year for the entire process to play through, but the logo as well as the show title will be trademarked soon, inshallah, and I love it. You can support the platform by listening, subscribing, reviewing, and rating where available. These are also all available on the website. Again, ayanaexplainsitall.com. You can also find on the website links to donate to the podcast. One of the ways I put my episodes together is to use different news sources. And a lot of these news sources require subscriptions, and they are not free. They aren't exactly cheap either. Most of the articles in today's episode come from cleveland.com, which is the website for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and it costs $10 a month. And a lot of their stories are subscriber-only stories, and I really needed to do a lot of research for today's topic. And so I went ahead and clicked that $10 a month, and you can help this show continue to use these resources by sending a small monetary donation through PayPal, or there's I signed up with Buy Me a Coffee. Have you guys heard of that? And you can go to the website and click on one of those links and just, whatever your heart, whatever is on your spirit to give is fine with me. This was a hobby for me, and now I've moved from hobby to full-fledged. This is what I'm doing. I'm serious. I'm serious about it, and I love it. And I want it to be highly successful, inshallah. So I continue to upgrade software and hardware out of my own pockets. And it's fun. It's a lot of fun. I love doing it. Don't get me wrong. It's wonderful, but it costs money. So you can become a patron of the podcast through those means. Ayana Explains It All is a podcast that bridges the gap between current events and human behavior. And let me tell you, some current events happened recently. Now, this episode, I have been mulling over and ruminating about in my head for several months, actually. And something happened recently. And I said, I got to talk about this now. I got to talk about this right now, because what's going on in my hometown of East Cleveland, Ohio, is abhorrent. It's awful. It's dreadful. It's so many things. And I was born in Cleveland, raised in East Cleveland. Most of my mother's family, they live in either Virginia or East Cleveland in the Cleveland area, but my parents are still in East Cleveland, so I occasionally have to tread down to that city. And this is not going to be a love letter to East Cleveland. So if you're looking for someone who's going to speak highly favorably about this city, you've come to the wrong place. I graduated from high school in 1996. And when I was in East Cleveland, when I lived in East Cleveland, it was not nearly as bad. It wasn't great, but it was not nearly as bad as it is now. I mean, it is awful. From streetlights that don't work to giant holes in the city streets, like holes, okay? These aren't potholes. They're not the size of a pot. Some of these holes are the size of a fucking crater. But so today I'm going to talk about what has happened in East Cleveland as far as its police force is concerned. I mentioned that I enjoy a good sleazy cop show, but when you have to deal with this in real life, it's not entertaining. It's not entertaining at all. It's like it's almost as if you see these things happening in real life and you wonder if people have been watching these movies and TV shows and thinking, hey, I ought to try that. I ought to bring some of that fiction into the real world, right? So most of my sources today are from cleveland.com. Like I said, a lot of the articles are subscriber only. So when you see the referenced articles in the description of the podcast episode and you go to look for the article and it's subscriber only, I am so sorry. But a lot of the important information was in those articles. They have a lot of free stuff, but a lot of the really good meat and potatoes are subscriber only. So cleveland.com. I also got a little bit of information from Vox, The Guardian, Wikipedia, the NAACP.com, and the Justice Department, and the FBI, surprisingly. Yeah, everybody's talking about East Cleveland police. Everybody's talking about East Cleveland because there is a lot to talk about. It is a tragedy. It's a travesty. It's incredible that this city still exists, to be honest with you. This is one of the beautiful things about Northeast Ohio is that it's made up of all of these very, rich ethnic groups. African American, Scottish, Irish, Polish, Arab, Persian. I mean, all of Puerto Rican, Mexican, all of these groups. And indigenous people, Native Americans, all of these groups comprise this large area of Ohio, and it's amazing. East Cleveland was partially founded by Scottish immigrants whose names can still be found on city buildings. Like East Cleveland was incorporated as a village in 1895 and became a city in 1991. The charter, which was ahead of its time, included provisions for women's suffrage, which, was unheard of. 1911, unheard of. Women didn't get the right to vote until 1920. So East Cleveland was ahead of its time, which was great. East Cleveland is still home to General Electric's historic Nela Park, although some of that is moving away. Nela Park is the world's first industrial park, and every holiday season, beginning around, I think it's like the day after Thanksgiving, they have this giant light display and they keep it on until January 1st. But every year as kids, me and my My siblings, my mother would drive us past, like we never got out and looked at the lights. She would drive past the lights and we would go, "Oh, lights." And I've taken my kids, it's on Noble Road in East Cleveland, and I've taken my kids down Noble Road to look at the holiday lights because I like that stuff. I like that festive stuff. Yes, I am Muslim, but I love to look at this giant light display. It's amazing. And it's a tradition in East Cleveland. It's probably one of the last few nice parts of the city of East Cleveland. Yeah, a lighting scene during the holidays is one of the last nice things about the city of East Cleveland. East Cleveland includes a portion of Euclid Avenue, which from 1860s through the 1920s was known as Millionaires Row. The many estates along the stretch of road, Euclid Avenue in East Cleveland, included the 248-acre home of the late John D. Rockefeller of Standard Oil. He was the world's first billionaire. But by the Great Depression, as in many big cities, a great number of homes along the Millionaires Row were demolished or abandoned. You can actually still see some. There's some still standing. There are, I believe, 18 of the original Millionaires Row's homes still standing, while there are 6 left in the city of Cleveland. East Cleveland was once a city bustling with Black-owned businesses. It even had its own hospital, Huron Road Hospital, which I don't know what year this happened. It was in like the early 2000s, maybe. The Cleveland Clinic took over. And after the Cleveland Clinic took over, and it also had a nursing school. Huron Road Hospital also had a nursing school. It's amazing. You have a city with its own hospital, unheard of now, mostly because, as with the Cleveland Clinic, when the big hospital machines take over the little hospitals, they shut them down. And so Cleveland Clinic shut down Huron Road Hospital. There's no longer any hospital serving the residents of East Cleveland. But there was a time where if you went to the hospital, you were going to Huron Road. And it was a quick little drive, little jump. We had a nice little ER. We had doctors, nurses servicing our area. It was amazing. East Cleveland had so many things. It was a city bustling with Black-owned businesses, funeral homes, clothing stores, grocery stores, hair salons, mechanic shops, corner stores, restaurants, recreation. And the high school and the junior high had so many competitive sports teams. If you were looking, there was a time that if you were looking for a successful and thriving Black community in Ohio, East Cleveland was it. If you were looking for a thriving and successful Black community in the country, East Cleveland, Ohio was it. It was a place where at one time, Blacks and whites lived together just fine. But, as with anything, white flight and redlining destroyed the community, essentially, because white people take their dollars with them. It's not like they move out of the city and they keep their businesses there. No, they take their businesses with them. We had donut shops. We had, Peter Pan Donuts. And down the street from where I lived, Jack's Donuts. I remember going there when I was a little kid, and I would take my little pennies, my coins, and I would buy penny candy or buy donuts. And Jack was a white man. And there was a woman who worked there. She was also white. But it didn't, little Black girl buying donuts from white people. It was just what we did. It didn't, dawn on me that these people were different from me, or they weren't different. We were all just people thriving, living, working, going to school. It didn't, it was harmonized. But at the same time, you could tell that the city was changing in the 80s and the 90s, especially. The city was changing. The dynamics of the city changed. And by the late 90s, early 2000s, you couldn't even find a drugstore, like a full service drugstore, as of probably 5 years ago. Now there's just a convenience pharmacy, and that's it. There's no like Walgreens where you can go and buy deodorant and Band-Aids and all. No, you can go and get your prescription, and that is it. And it's also a food desert. And I did an episode last year about food deserts, and I spoke about how corporations do not want to put stores where they strongly believe they will not have consistent consumer shopping. And a lot of the people in East Cleveland are poor and they subsist on government benefits. And you know how that works. First and the 15th. So you're going to go shopping when you have the money and you're going to spend everything on your card. You're not going to the store several times a week. Like I go to the store probably twice a week, or I go whenever I want. Stores like that. Stores like people who are shopping all the time, not just twice a month. So they're not going to put a grocery store where they don't get consistent shoppers. There are fast food places, of course. Of course. There are gas stations not owned by Black people. You can guess who they're owned by. No offense to those people. But Black-owned businesses used to be the hallmark of East Cleveland. Hair salons, mechanic shops. It used to be, if you went into a store, it was Black-owned. Little corner stores where you could buy ice cream and treats or whatever. You get your hair done at the place next door. You could go, to a hair shop. It made a difference because most of the city is Black. It made a difference to see Black ownership of things. But now there are so many places that are just closed. I remember there was a place that was, it was a dry cleaners, and the owner would sit in the window with his sewing machine doing alterations. Every time you passed there, he would be sitting in the window doing alterations. That should have been a historical place. Watching a man do alterations at his dry cleaners, it was amazing. It was amazing. That's closed. That been closed a long time ago. But a lot of places are closed. There used to be libraries. There's one library, and I believe the county took over that library. But there used to be so much. But, really, there doesn't need to be a lot because there aren't a lot of people living there. You want to look for something good? Hey, East Cleveland is home to Lakeview Cemetery, which is the final resting place of John D. Rockefeller, James A. Garfield, President of the U.S., Elliot Ness, Alan Freed, Ray Chapman, Garrett Morgan, Adela Prentice Hughes, Al Lerner, Carl Stokes. Yeah, that's good. It's the final resting place of some very famous people. There you go. I know I'm being glib about this, but that is it. There's less than 14,000 people living there. And there's a reason for that, because there is nothing there. You're not going to want to live where there is nothing. And now, because of their latest scandals with the police department, there are fewer police. There are about 24 police for about 13,600 people or so. 24 police. There's one fire station struggling. First responders sometimes have to use a van or borrow a truck or a car or whatever to get people out of emergency situations and to a hospital. Sometimes they have to call fire departments from other cities, ambulances from other cities to help. And recently, because of all of the scandals with the police department, the city has had to ask the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office and the state troopers, the Ohio State Troopers, to help with law enforcement in the city. It is a desperate, awful, ugly situation that, even though this is happening, the administrators continue to make it impossible to climb out of this hole. And I'll tell you what I mean by that in a minute. But people think that the administration and the police department are two separate entities, that they have nothing to do with the other, that they don't inform the other, and that is not true. I postulate that it is because of the mismanagement of the city by the administrators, the mayor, the city council, the police department was allowed to run amok in the city. That corruption grew and grew and grew and grew and grew to the point that now half of the force has been indicted by the county. You have police who have been indicted. It's incredible what they're accused of. Criminal cases, civil cases. But it starts at the top, not at the top of the police department. It starts at the top, the mayor. If you have a corrupt city government, you're going to have a corrupt city police force. There's nothing good that can thrive in a government that's corrupt. All of it is tainted. And some people will disagree. Some people will say, no, but there's still some good. So that means it's not all bad because no. It's so bad that even the little glimmers of light, the glimmers of hope, like the city judge, Judge Dawson, great judge, very fair judge, even things like that, he is overshadowed by the ugliness of the city administration and police department. East Cleveland was fiscally mismanaged so abhorrently that it is in a fiscal crisis. It's on life support, essentially. And in 2016, when the city was considering being annexed by the city of Cleveland, which I think is still a great idea, the council members made it so difficult because they wanted to stay on as advisors and keep their salaries. What are you going to advise on? How not to run a city? Yeah, I think we can figure that out. I think Cleveland can figure out how not to run a city. I think they got that down. But they became the wedge between Cleveland adopting East Cleveland and Cleveland not adopting East Cleveland. And so ultimately it did not happen. It needs to happen. But again, administrators are in the way. People don't want to let go of the great East Cleveland. Can you imagine if East Cleveland was no more? People think that all of the greatness, all of the goodness, the glory will be gone. No, people will still remember all of this. It's written down. People have memories. A lot of people with memories of growing up in East Cleveland and events happening in East Cleveland. I have some of my own. The current population of East Cleveland, Ohio, as I said before, is under 14,000 people. It is 13,580 something, and it's a population of mostly Blacks, a mix of young and old men and women spaced out among really a crumbling infrastructure, streets, buildings, homes, a few homes here and there, dilapidated business structures, empty motels. I mean, East Cleveland used to have motels, okay? They had churches. I remember once I was going to visit my parents, and I drove past this really nice, kind of quaint looking Catholic church on Euclid Avenue. And I saw a couple who had just gotten married. They were coming out of the church and they were white. And I was like, what are they doing here in East Cleveland getting married? And then my mother explained it to me and it made sense. She said that, you know, there are people who grew up in those churches. There are white people who grew up in those churches. Their grandparents attended church there. Their parents attended church there. So they would want to get married where their family attended church. I said, that makes sense. And I mean, the church was still intact. It had, you know, the ivy all over it. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. What if East Cleveland could do that? What if East Cleveland could be the city it used to be and just kind of build up the old places that people once haunted, that people once worshiped in and shopped in. But the businesses are not going to come back to East Cleveland. There's no reason for them to come back. There aren't people. There are not people. Businesses are going to go where they know people are going to be. And no one's driving to East Cleveland to go to a store or to go to, I don't even know. There are no sports events happening, except for the high school has a nice stadium donated to them by the Cleveland Browns, because that shit was falling apart. Fell into disrepair. And a lot of the elementary schools have closed or had to combine because they didn't have enough students. East Cleveland once had, I want to say, was it 6 elementary schools? Today, East Cleveland, like I said, is facing significant economic challenges and has struggled with issues such as poverty and crime, like many big cities. But this is not a big city. This is a small city, a very small city. but it's had several periods of fiscal emergency in recent years. And despite these challenges, though, there are some efforts to revitalize the city, which I've seen. Loiter, East Cleveland, they're working on some rehab projects, but it's not enough. It's not enough. I admire what these people are doing. There are a lot of abandoned buildings and abandoned homes, a lot of property that people could develop. And some people are developing it. Unfortunately, it's called gentrification. Yes, parts of the city are being gentrified. Ultimately, what I think needs to happen, especially since the police force is now being dwindled down, what I think needs to happen is the city needs to be annexed by Cleveland. It needs to be dissolved. It needs to go. No more East Cleveland. No more East Cleveland. Who will miss it? Not me. Not me. There's some people who are very nostalgic about East Cleveland. Very nostalgic. But let me tell you something. Memories are great. It's great to have fond memories of times gone by. Fantastic. But that city is hell. It is hell. The citizens made it hell. The government made it hell. The police made it hell. It is what it is. I told you guys you weren't going to like this. If you're from East Cleveland, or if you're a friend of mine and you're listening to this, you're not going to like it. I'm so sorry. I have nothing positive to say about it. I have nothing positive to say about this. And why? Because it has been so poorly managed. Not only that, the one thing that pisses me off so much, really grinds my gears, people who live in the city don't vote. That's the one thing that pisses me off. You could have so much change happen if you fucking people got off your asses and voted. The people who are living in the city who are eligible to vote are not voting. They're not voting. And it's been this way for years. For years. The people don't give a shit. A few people do. Not enough to make a difference, though. It's not enough people who care to make a difference here in a positive direction. All the good people are doing now is cleaning up messes. And it's so messy and it's so spilled over that all they're going to be doing is cleaning up messes. But another mess will come along and they'll have to clean that up too. They'll spend so much time cleaning up messes that there won't be any time or room or money left to really make a difference in this city. East Cleveland was not always a mayor and city council setup. Prior to 1985, East Cleveland had been under the leadership of a commission and a city manager. And in that year, voters grew frustrated with that form of government after 2 commissioners were charged with theft in office. And you'll notice theft in office throughout this entire episode. It's a popular activity for East Cleveland administrators and police, theft in office. So Attorney Darrell E. Pittman, I remember Mayor Pittman. He used to do really fun things for the kids of East Cleveland, but he became the first mayor to lead the city since 1908. He was sworn in on July 1st, 1986. But after 2 years on the job, in his second 2-year term, the city fell into a fiscal emergency. What a shock. What a shock. And then in 1989, Wallace Davis, the council president and a funeral home director, became mayor. At the time of his administration, he borrowed $2.5 million that had to be paid back in 8 years to get the city out of fiscal emergency. The city was still in fiscal emergency. Still. And his administration made the last payment in 1997, but the city remained in fiscal emergency, even into the next administration with Emmanuel Anwar, who ended up being indicted and convicted on federal charges of racketeering and corruption in 2004. He spent 9 years in federal prison. He sent the city into debt. It was already in fiscal emergency. It was in a deeper fiscal emergency. Deeper. And it's still there. It's still there. Not one of these motherfuckers managed to pull that city out of a fiscal emergency. They just made it worse. Eric Brewer became the city's fourth elected mayor on January 1st, 2006, and served one term. Why? Because he was doing something on the side that people didn't exactly like. He was living his life, but he was also, do we say cross-dressing anymore? We don't say that. But when he ran for mayor for a second term for re-election, photos of him that were less than flattering were disseminated of him wearing ladies' underthings. And so he lost. And then there was Gary Norton. You can't even get to the police because you have to get through all of this muck and mire. Gary Norton took office in January 2010. He was young, but although that did not affect his game, what affected his game is that he was an idiot. East Cleveland has a long line of idiot mayors who mismanage the city's funds, who mismanage the city. There were 2 unsuccessful recall attempts on Gary Norton, and ultimately, the city council's vice president, Brandon King, assumed Norton's position as mayor. Brandon King is the current mayor of East Cleveland and has also faced 2 recall attempts that have been unsuccessful. Why have they been unsuccessful? See, in East Cleveland, you can get a recall on the ballot, but unless you get voters to vote against the person you're recalling, that person is going to stay mayor. And as I said before, they cannot get people to vote in East Cleveland. So recall attempts are not successful. They have not been successful. Unless you can get people to the polls, it doesn't fucking matter if you don't want the mayor to be there anymore. They're still going to be there. And Brandon King, despite being the head of this city that's in fiscal emergency, that has dwindling resources, that is in debt, he still is holding on to this job. And certainly if you have a government that is in fiscal emergency, poorly managed, poorly looked after, if you have a government that's out of control, it stands to reason that the other areas of your city will be in disarray. Good leadership is the most effective trickle-down policy. If there was good leadership at the top, it stands to reason that corruption in the police department would be minuscule to none. Poor leadership cannot be concerned with poor policing because it is too busy keeping the curtain closed on its own misguided deeds, on its own corruption. According to statistics, now this is what police are dealing with. So that's the background. That's the background of what I'm about to talk about. There's no way a corrupt police department could thrive in a city where residents are voting, doing well, paying their taxes, where businesses are thriving. You're not also going to have a corrupt police force. You're not. Corrupt police exist where there is a corrupt government. They go hand in hand. There's no mayor or city council or city manager who's going to tolerate the kind of behavior I'm going to tell you about from their police. They're going to fire people. They're going to get rid of people. The one problem that they have, though, that they face is police unions. And so a lot of times bad police are fired. They get their jobs back. We've seen this in Cleveland. It also happens in East Cleveland. It happens all over the country. Bad police get fired. They get hired somewhere else. Or they get rehired. Because the police union don't play around about their people. They don't give a fuck. They don't care. Oh, you shot and killed somebody? Oh, you had a good reason probably, right? Yeah, okay. They can't fire you. They can't take away your pension. This is unfortunately the reality of the East Cleveland police. Let's give them a break. Show you what they're dealing with. According to statistics, the violent crime rate of East Cleveland is 7.69 per 100,000 residents. Right? And I told you, there are only 13,000. So it's about twice the national rate of 3.8 and above the statewide rate of 2.85. In the same way, the number of reported crimes per square mile, 168, is about 5 times that of Ohio, 30, which is 35, and the nation, which is 32.8. So the violent crime rate of East Cleveland is high, higher than the state, higher than the nation. The number of reported crimes is high, 5 times higher than the state and the nation. But while East Cleveland has earned a reputation for violent crime, much of that is at the hands of the police force. Yes, the police are part of the problem. The police are part of the violent crime problem in East Cleveland. But the starting salary of police in East Cleveland is $35,000. So it makes sense that they would turn to a life of corruption and crime and thievery and robbery to pad their income. It just makes sense. I mean, what do you want them to get, a second job? You want them to get a side job, a night job? Should they work 13 jobs to put food on the table? Why not just steal from drug dealers, drug addicts, people just driving through the city? Why not pull people over and just take the money out of their pockets and keep it? Makes sense, right? It's a lot easier than going and being security at the TJ Maxx. The largest debt of the city of East Cleveland stems from the police department. The largest debt is from civil judgments against the East Cleveland Police Department. They get these judgments and they don't pay them. Why? They don't have the money to. Or the government has so mismanaged the budget. They haven't balanced the budget. They have so mismanaged the budget that they cannot even see their way to paying them. They don't even bother. And they let these things languish. In fact, lawyers are refusing to take cases against the city, against the police department, because they know they're not going to get paid. They know that they have a good chance of winning, of course, but they know they're not going to get paid. So they don't take the cases. So if you're going up against the city of East Cleveland, you're probably going to be on your own, unfortunately. And I'm not going to say it's not worth it to sue them. I would sue the fuck out of them if something happened to one of my family members at the hands of police. I absolutely would. But get ready for the non-payment of your settlement. One of the most famous police brutality cases that resulted in the largest judgment against the city of East Cleveland is that of Arnold Black, the Arnold Black case. Now, if you haven't heard of this case, I mean, you probably have been under a rock because it's been in every news publication. This case is so unbelievable, right? That the Serial podcast on season 3 of the Serial podcast, they focused on the justice system of Cuyahoga County, and they specifically focused on East Cleveland. They did an entire episode about East Cleveland, and they spoke extensively about the Arnold Black case. So on April 28th, 2012, Detective Randy Hicks, Officer Jonathan O'Leary, and other members of the East Cleveland Police Department arrested Arnold Black on suspicion of drug activity. Instead of transferring him to the jail, and while he was handcuffed, Hicks punched Black as O'Leary stood by. Black was then placed in a holding cell after his arrest and was later released. Black claimed that the police locked him in a storage closet for 4 days with no toilet and nothing to eat or drink but a carton of milk. In the resulting lawsuit, the police could not produce dashboard video. And while a jury initially awarded Black $22 million, including $10 million from Police Chief Ralph Spotts, the city appealed the verdict, and the 8th District Court of Appeals overturned the decision. The Ohio Supreme Court also refused to hear Black's appeal. However, at a subsequent retrial in 2019, Black was awarded $20 million in compensatory damages and $30 million in punitive damages, which the city cannot pay, which the city has not paid, which the city has no plans of paying. It has no money to cover lawsuits, and most of its debt, most of the lawsuits are related to police misconduct. As I said before, starting pay for officers is about $35,000 a year. And East Cleveland is one of the lowest paid police departments in Ohio. Records show, and many of its young quality officers jump to better paying departments within a few years, which is fine because apparently a lot of these officers are pretty fucked up people. East Cleveland has a lot of gangs, a lot of gang activity. And in East Cleveland, at least 2/3 of the police force comprises the largest gang in the city. The police are the largest gang, in my opinion. A lot of people had no idea what the fuck was going on in East Cleveland until the Arnold Black case. And then there was the murder of Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams in East Cleveland. Now recall that the murder of Russell and Williams took place on November 26, 2012, when police from Cleveland and East Cleveland collectively fired 137 shots into the vehicle of an unarmed duo who fled from police out of fear that they were being hunted. 13 officers were charged with dereliction of duty. One officer was charged with voluntary manslaughter and ultimately acquitted. None of the East Cleveland officers involved in the shooting faced any criminal action or disciplinary action. But it is in fact a fact that police chases that end in the death of alleged criminals and pedestrians are infamous in East Cleveland. East Cleveland is small, so police do usually end up chasing people out of the city. And they'll chase into Cleveland, they'll chase into Euclid, they'll chase into Cleveland Heights. They don't care. They don't care. They don't stop. They don't care. It is the policy of the police department to chase until they either get the person or someone crashes a car. They go 60, 70 miles down city streets, residential streets, people walking in the street. They don't give a fuck. They'll hit you with the car. Or the person they're chasing will hit you. They do not care. They see chases as a way of keeping criminals in check and out of their city. They don't want the city to become a haven for criminal activity, although it already is. Imagine all of these chases and all this beating down of suspects you've done, and still your crime rate is higher than that of the entire fucking country. Your crime rate is higher than the entire state in which you sit. You've done all of this violence, all of this, brute force, this brutality, and it has not helped. It hasn't worked to end crime in East Cleveland. An analysis by Cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer showed that 87% of the chases in East Cleveland happened after East Cleveland officers tried to stop someone for a minor traffic violation or for what's called a pretextual stop. That's when officers use a small reason like tinted windows, or your license plate light is out or headlight is out as a reason to pull you over. Their hope is that they're going to find illegal drugs or guns and they can take you in. Or in East Cleveland's case, so they can rob you. But East Cleveland's chase policy is to allow officers to chase cars for any violation. Many police departments in Northeast Ohio in recent years have moved away from allowing police to launch a chase for minor offenses. But East Cleveland still allows it. Dave Yost said that he spends a lot of time thinking and reading about the best way for police to handle chases. He said to the Cleveland Plain Dealer, "There's a good question as to whether those things are worth the risk." Yost said of chases for minor offenses, "On the other hand, it's an indisputable fact that many fugitive felons, violent felons, are apprehended out of a police stop or traffic stop. And getting future violent, they can predict that someone's going to be a future violent felon. And getting future violent felons off the street is an important factor here. So I don't know that I can give you a definitive answer to whether police chases are good or not." That was the question. Are they good? He doesn't know. He doesn't know. Even though he's a lawyer. He doesn't know if police chases are good. But in East Cleveland, they are not good. They have ultimately proven to be very bad. They've been proven to be fatal. They're so terrible, in fact, that the city passed an ordinance called the Tamia-Chapman Law, aimed to limit police pursuits after a 2019 police chase that originated in Cleveland resulted in the death of a young girl walking with a group of friends to the East Cleveland Library for a Christmas party. And by all accounts, in the city, it has not been enforced. Why? Because they don't like it. They don't like, the police didn't like it. The mayor, Brandon King, didn't like it. In fact, he didn't like it so much that he didn't even address it. He didn't approve it. He didn't veto it. He just pretended like it didn't exist. Imagine, imagine you can't enforce a law because your leader refuses to acknowledge that it even exists. A law aimed at saving the lives of pedestrians, people on the street of your city, cannot be enforced because you're mad that anybody would dare tell your police to not chase criminals, or that police chases need to stop at the East Cleveland border. But the Tamia Chapman law directs officers to pursue only suspects accused of serious crimes. Police officers, however, ignore it and continue to speed through the city. They believe chases are necessary to keep order in the city. There was another police chase, a February 2023 police chase of an impaired driver who fled an accident scene that ended in a crash that critically injured a toddler. There's so many of these cases. The Ohio Supreme Court recently ordered the city of East Cleveland to pay more than $12 million in damages and interest to the victims of an accident caused by an East Cleveland police officer in a civil suit 15 years ago. Now, to his credit, in this case, Eric Brewer thought the case was so egregious that he fired the police officer. And the police chief said, "No, why would you fire him? It wasn't his fault," and reinstated the officer. And the East Cleveland Vice President, Juanita Gowdy, says that the administration actually never informed City Council about the lawsuit that the Supreme Court has ordered them to pay, and at least half a dozen other lawsuits filed against the city. She says the city has no choice but to pay, obviously, but they have to balance the budget first. The only way people are going to get paid is if they see that they have money to pay it. The city mostly relies on traffic cameras to boost its budget. Traffic cameras are pretty controversial in Ohio because the law is on, it's off, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. In some cities, it's on, but there has to be a police officer or someone standing at the camera watching. They can't just have the camera. That's the law. They can't just have the camera on. And so for years, East Cleveland had someone sitting in a van with the camera set up, and they would just be passing out tickets. But people didn't pay the tickets because there was no enforcement behind the tickets. It was just you either pay it or you don't. They couldn't put points on your license. They couldn't get a judgment against you for the most part. So there was no incentive for people to pay them. But it's at some point, people got the message that East Cleveland is the city with the cameras, and you don't go speeding through that city. In 2019, the state of Ohio conducted an audit of East Cleveland, and the latest fiscal report released in May of, I believe it was 2021, shows that the city has nearly $33 million in assets, and it has more than $57 million in liabilities. As I said before, most of that are judgments against the city due to police civil rights abuses or people they have slammed into with their cars doing police chases. So yeah, that includes $31.1 million in legal judgments against the police department. But get this, in September 2022, 7 current and former East Cleveland police officers were charged with theft in office and assault. And then in October 2022, 4 officers were accused of beating 2 people following separate car chases, lying about it in official reports, and smashing the cell phone of a man who tried to record the officers attacking him. In that case, officers were charged in a 16-count indictment with felonious assault, interfering with civil rights, theft in office, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, and dereliction of duty. In the September 2022 case, police officers, including the police chief, Scott Gardner, were charged with theft in office, bribery, tampering with records, and insurance fraud. Most of these charges are still pending, and everyone is innocent until proven guilty, although 2 police officers from the October 2022 case have pled guilty on and will be sentenced this coming week on April 6th. But get into this. So the police chief was indicted in October 2022. In 2014, the now ex-police chief, because he's been indicted, in 2014, Police Chief Scott Gardner pled guilty under a plea deal to 2 counts of attempted failure to file a tax return, and he was given 5 years of probation in order to pay restitution. He got to keep his job as a police officer, and he ended up becoming the police chief of East Cleveland. There are about 24 police officers left after all of these indictments. There are 24 police officers left. I believe before that, there were 45. But these recent indictments are not a rarity in the police department. According to research, from 1998 to 2017, 17 officers were charged. But the most egregious case was the Arnold Black case, of course. But no one was made to account for that, unfortunately, except for the city, which has a judgment against it, which it hasn't paid yet. But the list of cases, fleecing drug dealers, sex offenses, sexually assaulting women during traffic stops, robbing people who they've pulled over for traffic stops, there was one case where they challenged people to fights, and if they won the fight, they could get out of the charges. So it was like a fight club. It was a fight club, I guess. There was a case in East Cleveland in 2021 where a police chase resulted in a foot chase that resulted in a police officer shooting and killing 19-year-old Vincent Belmonte. And the chase was one of 105 by East Cleveland officers in the first 4 months of 2021. And I point out this case because it was particularly egregious. The police officer turned off his body cam so that there's no official record of the police shooting, but I managed to see it anyway. Why? Because a bystander recorded what happened. And clearly, this officer murdered this young man, but he was not charged with any crime. But apparently, this officer, McDonald, is also infamous because he was investigated in late 2020 after another officer flagged comments he made about taking marijuana from the department's evidence locker. But an internal investigation ended when no marijuana was found missing. However, the shooting of Belmonte by McDonald happened while McDonald was on departmental probation, stemming from a January 2019 incident in which he helped release a woman from the city jail in exchange for her agreeing to go on a date with him. Gardner suspended him for 10 days without pay, but brought him back. Gardner, after the murder, he took to Facebook to defend his officers and the shooting, and he called news coverage of police chases by East Cleveland police. He called the news coverage of it a smear campaign. He said that the news was focused too much on showing the negative of East Cleveland and calling out their police chases and saying they were improper and that they should not happen. And he was upset about that. And so he went on Facebook and he got people to rally on his side, back the blue. Now, what people didn't understand is that the blue was being real shady blue, okay? They were being sleazy blue. And so he's up there, he's defending his police department. He's saying, don't talk bad about my cops and don't talk bad about my police. And in the meantime, he's fucking stealing, allegedly. Allegedly stealing, okay? Allegedly. But the Cleveland Plain Dealer analysis of police chases in East Cleveland that he was so upset about, conducted in 2021, showed that of 105 chases, 40% ended in crashes. Nearly all topped out at 50 miles per hour or more, and 80% of the stops that led to the chases were for minor traffic violations or issues such as tinted windows or license plate violations. Now, remember, in East Cleveland, the police can chase for any reason, for any minor traffic stop. They don't care. And of course, most of the chases came from minor traffic stops. All 63 people arrested during that time frame were Black. What a surprise. To get arrested in the city of East Cleveland, to be pulled over in the city of East Cleveland, you really are gambling with your life. You really are gambling with your life. Now, in recent weeks, 9 East Cleveland police officers have been charged by Cuyahoga County prosecutors for police misconduct and civil rights violations, thanks to a 2-year-long investigation with help from the Federal Bureau of Investigations. Yes, that is how bad it had gotten in East Cleveland. It was so bad that the FBI said, yes, we will step in and help you figure out what's going on in this city. There are too many officers being charged with crimes. What is going on? And in 2 years, they found a myriad of chargeable offenses. It's so incredible. It's so incredible that any police chief would get on any medium and defend his police officers when this is what he is in charge of, unless he was also involved in it. And of course, now we see he was. It's always the loudest person in the room who is the guiltiest, I find. So of the 11 officers indicted in March 2023, 4 of them were already indicted on other crimes from the September and October 2022 indictments. So we have 11 officers who were indicted. 4 of them were already in trouble, including Gardner. He's indicted again. A fucking again. And so in 2022, there were 45 police officers on the East Cleveland police force. And then after all of the indictments, there are about 24 police officers left. And as I mentioned before, the city has asked the Ohio State Troopers and the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office to step in and aid them with law enforcement in the city. They essentially have they essentially don't have enough officers to police the city. It doesn't surprise me. You let it go on for this long. You let officers who are corrupt continue to come back. You rehire people. You keep people on the force who are committing sexual offenses, who are committing battery, who are committing theft. You don't pay people well enough as an incentive for people to even want to work in East Cleveland. It sounds like something that needs help because it does. And there is no one in a position right now to help the city more than the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio placed East Cleveland on fiscal emergency in 2012. The city must remain in fiscal emergency until it has a financial recovery plan and a 5-year forecast that state officials approve. A financial planning and supervision commission oversees the city's attempt to put together that plan for its recovery. They have not come up with a plan yet. Not even close. Not even close. The city is still in fiscal emergency. They now have a new police chief who has to clean up the mess left behind from these recent indictments. Recall that they're indictments from September, October, and recently March 2023. A mayor who has been challenged with recall attempts twice. A mayor who does not get along for the most part with his city council. A city council that can't even balance the budget of the city as they are charged with, though they continue to collect a salary for doing so. You have all of this mismanagement and corruption coming to bear on the city of East Cleveland, on the citizens of the city of East Cleveland. An annexation by the city of Cleveland would essentially fiscally rescue East Cleveland. It'll change a lot of things. Yes, it will change the course of the city. It may even improve the trajectory of the city. It may go up instead of down. But at this moment, there are no plans to do that. People have been talking about it for years. I don't know if it's going to happen, but it's what people talk about. It's the scuttlebutt. But right now they're faced with so much turmoil that it does not make sense to continue operating as a city. The city should be dissolved. The corruption of the city government completely eroded the confidence the citizens have in the city of East Cleveland to become a healthy, thriving city any longer. The corruption is not silent. It is not undercover. It is not anomalous. It is the prevailing, characteristically loud and violent and dangerous culture of the city's police department that for decades has terrorized this small city and its residents. It has resulted in a loss of police protection. It has resulted in a loss of confidence from its citizens in the ability of the city to manage their city, to manage the schools, to manage the roads, to manage the buildings, the infrastructure, to manage the justice needed to protect the people of East Cleveland. One member of the city council declared that a few indictments does not mean that the entire police force is in trouble. But ma'am, when the leadership is corrupt and officers commit multiple thefts and assaults and civil rights violations, and they're all wearing the same uniform and backing each other up and high-fiving each other and going to bat for each other's corruption, they create a dark cloud over the police department. And in the dark, it is hard to tell who is whom. And this has been Ayana Explains It All, brought to you by Facts, Figures, and Enlightenment. Take care.